So I know that we had a couple tables that broke up. We started once at 11. Let's actually start with 1 this time. How about that? Haven't done that yet. And we have about a half hour for this again, same as before, but this time we're actually missing 3 tables, so I think in the ballpark of 3 minutes-ish would work great.
Okay, I'll be reporting for Table 1. Top 3, we came up with things like terminology, clarifying funding requirements, aid in the sort of tenure and promotion side, but also I think the biggest one was clarity on just what to do with your data. If you have data of a certain kind, what do you do with it? Where do you put it? What's the right approach? And acknowledging that your genomics data is not going to be handled the same way as your satellite data and so forth. So sort of discipline-specific approach to data. And how we might get there, one thing we were thinking about is a sort of solicitation-specific approach. So instead of convening a new national initiative to define the IT solution for all of our data, say, no, for this solicitation that is funding a number of proposals, we're going to tell you what to do. Instead of asking you for a data management plan, we're going to predefine the data management approach for the proposals that are funded by this solicitation. And then when you get funding, we'll bring you together maybe a kickoff conference, and we'll fine tune and fix it if it's not right, and then off we go. And you must do it. So, we're predefining the approach and seeing how that works out. Another aspect of our thinking in there maybe was don't build new stuff. Predefine an approach that just uses what's already out there. It could be commercial cloud, could be existing repositories at your agency, at your university, whatever. Get an 80% solution which is decent, and then at the end have a sort of post-proposal, post-award conference that discusses what went well and what went wrong and maybe fix it next time. So that seemed to be a kind of tempting idea. I'm going to try to make that happen at NOAA with one of our some future solicitation. Get a program who's willing to do this, and we'll tell the PIs, don't give us a data management plan. We're telling you what to do. Check the box that says you will do it if funded, and off we go. And then the other thing is maybe each solicitation should have a data manager from the funding agency assigned to it to make sure that all the proposals from that solicitation are doing the right thing. And so that was kind of where we were. In terms of should we continue the conversations, yes, and how. At happy hour was one suggestion. But also, meetings like this are good because they do bring together people from different domains, but also we thought conversations about this at the meetings that are already happening in a domain, like in my case, say American Geophysical Union or the Genomics Conference or whatever. Let's talk about these things. Sorry. In fact, at AGU we do, because there's actually an informatics track, and we talk a lot about this, but I don't know about some of the other domains. So leveraging existing conferences, yes, new conferences as well, but especially leveraging existing infrastructure and approaches would be great. Thanks.
I'm Jen Zhao from Table 2, the Smithsonian, and our priorities were funding and practicality of data access. What do we mean by data access? Like, is it just shared, or are we actually sharing for people to actually use it? And how do we help smaller institutions with limited resources? Another priority was curation. How do we create a community that can do curation for, just sharing resources on, advice on how to create that, and how to go about curating data. And the third priority we thought of was handling private, not-for-public research data. Like, how do we tackle cybersecurity for various amounts of data sets, and how do we go about different IT concerns? And so we the priority that we addressed was the accessibility one. So like previously stated, we should build out more of what is working, look at what's already made. We also need to focus on smaller institutions and what they can contribute to the community with their limited capabilities, because they have valuable input as well. And one of the things that is working is creating science gateways, like combine data and analysis in one place with local computing and tools that are readily available. Just put it all in one place for the public. And for every data project, maybe adding to data management plans potential visualization tools for thinking about outreach right from the beginning. How are you going to get your data so that people from the public are interested in it? And we also thought about curation, how to solve that issue. So there is a data curation network that's being created. Wendy was talking about it. That's led by Cornell, and there's 8 different institutions with skills.
University of Minnesota.
Oh, sorry. She brought it up. It's led by the University of Minnesota. And 8 institutions with skills in various areas to share expertise, not sharing infrastructure, but maybe we'll work up to that eventually. And for the third question, we thought about, how do we stay away from email fatigue and and meeting fatigue, it's fun to go to various meetings. We thought maybe having a Stack Exchange, some sort of forum where you can go in and it's easy to ask questions. You can make topics that are specific to you and other people can weigh in on it. But, who's going to make it but just throwing out that idea. And leveraging existing venues, like previously stated. There are other conferences that could have data management bundled into it, and we who go to those meetings can meet together there. All right, thanks.
So table 4.
Okay. Elizabeth Long for Table 4, once again, from University of Chicago. So we actually came up with 4 things, because we're Table 4. So training was the first one, and we talked about both kind of for researchers, but also I think for data professionals and within library, the fact that there's a lot of need still for training. Coordination. And there we were talking about both kind of on campus, how we could be better facilitating coordination, and also kind of on the national level thinking about, better understanding of who's responsible for what things. Automation and ways in which we could make things easier through automation to help promote adoption of data management and data sharing. And then our last one, and this is the one that we ended up then covering in number 2, was the need for stronger incentives and/or enforcement. That was still really a concern that there's, code is still not really required to be shared. People were expressing, discovering, problems with people who didn't want to share that there's still a lot of experience with reviewers who aren't really critiquing DMPs very strongly. And so we took that one on to discuss and really talked about the need to figure out how to move these conversations into disciplinary forums. And so we had someone from RDA at our table, and we were talking about that as one, place that could really take on this issue of how could we move this conversation into a different sphere, so it's not just all of us talking to ourselves, because we talked about the fact that in some ways we've all drunk the Kool-Aid, and how do we get this out to another group of people. I think the other that we talked about were university administration, so how do we get it out there as well. And so then we also talked about the importance of incentives, that it shouldn't only be about, how do we create better enforcement of this, but so really talking about how you could identify champions in each field. We talked a lot about the fact that we need the fields themselves to be developing standards for what it means to do good data management for that field. And that one of these problems is it's still these, talked about so often in these kind of vague, high-level terms, and that we need to move it into something where you can say, for your field, this is what you should be doing and what the standards are. And so really working on how we could get some champions for that. And then we kind of subsumed our automation topic under this as another way to really develop incentives and even enforcement, that if you can automate it, it just happens and you don't have to have people being involved in making it happen. And so then we moved into that last question in talking a little more specifically about the need to, what needs to be done next is thinking about how to get on the agendas in other kinds of places. And we also, like Table 2, talked about using, and Table 1 I think as well, using existing infrastructure, that it's really helpful to think about what are the current meetings that are happening and how do we get on their agendas instead of just having another separate kind of meeting. And then last thing we talked a lot about was the lack of any kind of models for long-term management of data, and that we need to think about how to do more to move those kinds of conversations forward. And we felt like that is something that would be of interest to university presidents, and so it might be a way of getting universities involved, the administration involved in how do we actually develop a cost model for this, and who should be deciding on who should be taking it on. Is it something that the government agencies should do? Is it something universities should do? So.
Hi, Dave Kohler from the Digital Preservation Network for Table 5. So we also came up with 4 ideas instead of 3, just because we wanted to overachieve a little bit. But I think we can easily slide our 4th in with as a subcategory. So our top really was training and education. What do we do at the graduate level data management training, integrating creation, dissemination, and discovery into the curriculum? Research data management assistance was also a big topic, and having the library have research help desks and clinics to bring in resources for the researcher to go from the inception of the project all the way through publication and get that assistance along the way. For our second, we talked about incentivization at the researcher level. And we could easily slip our 4th category underneath that of saying using uniform data formats and standards compliance. So how do we actually incentivize researchers to use those standards to push that forward and to integrate that into their practice? And our 3rd was discoverability. So that's discoverability for self and for sharing outside of the group. One of the critical things is contextual metadata for reuse. So are we adequately describing the data sets that are being created so they're easy to reuse and easy to rediscover? And within the research group, is there good data management practice? Can the research group itself find the data that it's created, contextualize that data for reuse, and actually further the research endeavor? And then, of course, external researcher discovery at the end of the process. For the second question, the initiatives, we thought that faculty leadership by example was probably the most productive way to move things forward. That encouraging faculty to use good practice, to lay that out, to make it a kind of a mandatory element of the research practice. Graduate and undergraduate level data management training, integrating creation, dissemination, and discovery, again, kind of back from the training and education side. Really important, instill good habits early in the process so they continue through the research endeavor. And then connecting the published narrative to analysis of the evidence. So to really institute good practice that the journal article does reference the data, that the data is analyzed correctly, and that use kind of once again, a higher level systems thinking of, does the data actually match what you're saying in the research paper? For the third question on how we should move this forward, we had a lot of things mentioned that aren't working. I think this is really typical that we know some of these things are not productive, like open-ended community discussions. How do you get the most important people to actually discuss the problems? Part of that is scoping the conversation, making it relevant to the researchers, and including researchers in the conversation. So we were saying a lot of us here are probably not directly involved in the research. We're at the administrative level or we're at some other level and not actually doing the research. So do we have the correct context to bring the researcher into this endeavor and into the conversations? Thanks.
Page here. My name is Carol Song from Purdue University, representing Table 7. We had a very lively discussion despite of people peeling off. And we're right on the numbers too. And so we came up with 3 major challenges. The first one is the lack of institutional strategy and collaboration among different units among the institution, whether it's a school or a campus or other organizations. And some of the things we mentioned are we really need institutional commitment on doing the RDM, and also we discussed this really needs to start at the proposal phase. You don't want to come in at the end when everything is said and done and no budget was for this part of the work. And it would be great to have institutional templates for people. Some universities do these, not everybody. And also, people feel that it's really the social barriers of doing RDM. A lot of cases, it's the recognition of who's doing what and the unclear nature of the current understanding. The second challenge was mentioned, sort of related to number 1, but we wanted to highlight it. It's the lack of dedicated resources on campuses to do this, starting from the proposal phase to through the execution. And is it the role of the library? A lot of places, the libraries do have that role. Other places, maybe research computing, so it's unclear. But regardless, there needs to be dedicated resources to do this. The third one is related to software and tools. And our discussion centered around RDM is really a process. It's not just one tool. So the best tools would be those that are very intuitive, easy to use. You don't need to go through weeks of training. And it needs to be operational. So it's there. You don't need to, every time a researcher needs to do something, say, oh, wait a minute, we need to do some additional development on that. And definitely tools that can automatically capture metadata and other related information. So those are our 3 challenges that we identified. So in response to those, and we came up with some thoughts about possible initiatives. One is engagement of policymakers at institutions. This could be done through meetings like this, or we talked about perhaps organizations like CAS could integrate this kind of conversation into the sessions. In fact, Sharon already has it on her agenda, which is great. And to include more diverse group of people, data managers, people from the library, and CIOs, people who can make decisions. And let me see. The second initiative that we were thinking, I think other groups mentioned it too, education, to integrate RDM education into the courses in other ways, software, carpentry, things like that. The third one is related to software tools. We would really like to see independent assessment and study of the current tools that are out there, which ones are easy to use. We really like to hear from the end users, not just the people who develop them. So the third question, yes, definitely. How? Broadening participation, inviting a broader group of people who have decision-making powers and can contribute to this process. And the other one is really sharing experiences with the tools and also best practices.
Good morning. I am Rachel Vincent Finley from Southern University, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I will be reporting for Table 9. Okay, so our top 3 priorities for needs, we noted automating or easing technical issues, so thinking about technical, descriptive, and provenance metadata capture to enable verification and reuse. So thinking about, we also thought about institutional governance. So should this be top-down, forming policies, groups, and directives, again, at the institutional level. And we also noted data security. So we had actually a very long list, and we had to pick 3 of those. But those were what we thought would be the top priorities. So initiatives that could address the top of our top priorities actually captured 2 of our issues, the first being institutional governance and the other being data security. So training was a big talking point, and we wanted to think about dedicating staff to provide a bridge between the domain and different data classifications. So the security part, again, came into play when we were talking about skills, training, and again, thinking about dedicated staff. So does that mean bringing in new staff or training those who are already in place? And we thought that a mix of both would be important. We also noted that perhaps in the skill building, we could provide certification and think about someone who can sit on IRB sessions and communicate with IT people and administrative staff. And again, the idea would be to provide direct and comprehensive solutions to research data management through groups and researchers. So we we're also thinking in the skill building sector, how would you advertise to bring in personnel? And we were thinking of general names, and generally we thought of cyber practitioner. However that gets more specific at individual institutions. And we also thought about initiatives in that same realm. A subsection of that is in these initiatives, think about funding the initiatives. So thinking about 50-50 matches. Some talked about funding 50-50 from the provost and the department. Others were thinking about perhaps funding agencies could seed 50% and the institution could seed 50%. But again, generally thinking about initiatives that would fund the hiring of specialists to deal with research data management. And finally, for question number 3, we said, yes, of course, and a lot of the ideas to continue the conversation. And of course, our first thought was, let's meet at happy hour, but then we thought, okay, let's chisel out time, as others have noted, at the conferences that are already in place. So perhaps a birds of a feather session at supercomputing, or something could happen at the CASC meeting or at the library meetings. But wherever we already meet, perhaps we should chisel out time at those meetings to think about this question among our individual practitioners. Thank you.
Okay, again, Jim Myers, University of Michigan, Table 10. We also had a lively discussion with more points than I can summarize, but I guess our main answer to the first question there, we frame things really as it's time to go to a data as infrastructure, data as service perspective. And we tried to make that mean more than we must fund infrastructure, which we know is hard to do. And the things that we started to coalesce around are, it seems like there's time for sort of the, what I call the web transition, right? There's an HTTP, HTML analog of just having a universal way to get your data and metadata out, whatever it is, that starts a virtuous cycle. And as soon as we said that, it's a little bit of a twisted concept to get your head around, but that means that you start having so that any service that wants to process data can go to any repository, and if the right metadata is there, it can work on it, right? If the right format is there, and you suddenly have a driver for the kinds of things that we're all talking about of, we need a common vocabulary for X or Y or Z, or we need standardization of formats. In some sense, you get the carrot there. So we started saying, if you do this sort of universal access mechanism, then you can start having the standards and service infrastructure, service ecosystem where, just like there are universal browsers and there are people who started building tools that worked across anything that could be connected into a browser, instead of these one-to-one, this service works with that repository, we start to get that dynamic. And that leads to, so that's sort of, do this HTML for data, do the standardization for the various disciplines to get the domain metadata and formats right. And then the third leg of that infrastructure was that means that we start to have training. And again, we've talked about various aspects, and we had strong opinions that there should be, name and define what kinds of data specialists, research data specialists we need, but that could be classroom data, the data carpentry, all the things we've all been talking about. And again, I think the magic is as soon as you say that's infrastructure and not about a certain platform or a certain tool, you get a different dynamic. How can we develop initiatives? I guess part of the good news was that we had lots of ideas that I think fit the kind of typical NSF grant structure. Right? There are people who wanted training grants, people had ideas for what undergraduates and graduates could do, people who had ideas for services they wanted to build as soon as they could get a hold of the metadata and data, people who wanted to do an automated data inventory. Once you have access to all the data, you can count it and you can do all these things, and they fit the grant structure. And again, we had lots of cool ideas, right, and we can all compete about which ones will win. The other part that we saw that's a little bit harder is partly we've semi got the grant structure for that we still need to build this somehow. Somebody's got to fund the equivalence of the, CERN funding the first HTML, NCSA at that point, building the first browser and then having it go on other places. There's some funding for that kind of core, help the transition go, but then there needs to be either there are various models that have worked in things like computing, where from national centers, there are synthesis centers, there's a cybersecurity center that NSF funds that really doesn't have its own resources, it's just expertise. And in some sense, we sort of wanted to back out of what's the right answer there, saying, you can try one or more of them, we need to put some resources there, but again, sort of cycling back to the first, once it says infrastructure, if you make the wrong guess on that, if the data can move, it's not you haven't wasted the, everybody needs that insurance policy that if I make a move right now and I guess wrong, if things can move because you've got some interoperability, then it's not a wasted investment anymore, right? And so we can let the market dynamic figure out which ones of these works over time. And we had fun talking, is data like computing or is data like the web? Because there are no web supercomputer center type of things. And so, data's sort of in the middle. From those first two questions, we started saying, where should RDMI go? We had people who've been to all the workshops and saying, it's really been fun to see the evolution. There are research data implementations at this workshop, so, there's been a success here. And we sort of had two directions, sort of up and out. We wanted to have another workshops where, more advanced infrastructure, more services, more of the data lifecycle showing up here in this workshop. There was a continued need for that sort of, let's get the leadership together and kind of see where RDMI is going. But at the same time, then there was the out that, there are people here saying, well, I'd like to know how to do it on my campus. And again, we said that could be RDMI or that could be, CASC does that in supercomputing. You've got NDS and RDA, and so maybe that's a function that might shift out of this workshop series, but that needs to go on too. So I think that's it for us, and again, apologies to all the other cool points that we didn't get to.
As long as you have them in your notes, we're okay. Table 11. Yes. Last but not least.
Yes, so thank you, everybody. You basically covered a lot of our points. I'm Mandy Gooch. I am with the Odom Institute at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So I am going to reiterate a lot of what you said really quickly. So for question 1, we talked a lot about getting, one of our priorities being getting buy-in from the various communities, that being a very large priority for us. Another one is to echo everybody's sentiment on training, getting everybody on the same page in all the various communities. And then the third one was also institutional leadership. So making sure that there is some sense of ownership happening from our leadership so that these initiatives can move forward successfully. So moving on to question 2 really quickly, we talked a lot about collaboration and leveraging the different communities that we participate in, both at the institutional level, so leveraging other institutions that are close within your region or maybe have similar scopes and purposes, leveraging professional organizations that you're part of, and also was brought up the NSF Regional Data Hub, so leveraging that community as well. In terms of question 3, we also said yes, of course, and talked a lot about attending conferences and whatnot and doing like a joint conference, so that's been said a lot. We also did talk about developing webinars from different community perspectives, and one of the suggestions was identifying basically champions in the researcher realm who participate in actively in data management practices and having them present on why and how they are doing what they are doing. So, thank you.
Now let's clap. So we have about an hour slated, just shy of an hour slated to now dig into this a little more, talk about what we've summarized. I think Barali is going to provide a bit of a wrap-up for us, and I see there are definitely going to be some people that are leaving, so I will add in here now my own thanks for your patience with my being the enforcer and for coming to the meeting.
Thank you, Wendy. We are reaching the last hour of our workshop. We really did cover a lot, and I was very, very, very pleased by the participation and the good ideas, actually more than what we had thought. What I thought I will do before I kind of wrap up with some of my concluding comments, we heard quite a number of themes, and so many of them were really coming back, and in particular two that really resonated to me as I was listening this past the summary is this idea that we all need to work together to continue to build on existing structures and existing tools. I think that came out quite often. And then you also have this whole idea that we really need to continue to bring the different communities that we brought together here to continue to have this conversation. So I thought we have two microphones because perhaps we had the table discussion that were constrained to answering specific questions. So I wanted to give a few minutes, maybe if somebody, basically kind of an open mic, if somebody has something they wanted to come up to suggest to the group before we conclude, at least to make sure we had given the opportunity for everybody. So anybody, or did we cover through everything through the tables? All right, so anyway, what I was thinking of doing actually, I wanted just to conclude with a quote, and it came from the slide of Jeff de la Beaujardière, and I hope I had the accent this time correctly. So I think this kind of summarized a little bit something for me that I thought I want to take away is we don't want to just manage data. We really want to use and reuse the data. At the end of the day, that's really what is important for our scientists. And I thought that was something that really when I'm going back today, I'm bringing back, I don't know if it's going to become my quote from you, but if you can allow me, I'll be quoting this from now on. But I also wanted to take this opportunity, though, to thank my organizing committee. Tom Forlani from the University of Buffalo had a conflict, was not able to attend. Wendy, who did an excellent job this day and a half, being our MC. Ruth Marisha from Stanford University. Benjamin Rogers and Rachel Vincent Finley. We were meeting literally on the call for the last 2 weeks, and the last week was really kind of a call constantly. I really want to ask everybody to join me to giving a round of applause. I also wanted to thank some of the people who made this possible. Leila and Marisa and Lisa. I just see Kim going back. Yeah, she's coming back. And I wanted to, if Kim, you can raise your hand, I really wanted to thank her specifically because without her, really, she handedly really did so much for this workshop, but I really wanted to thank you in particular. I don't think I would have been able to do it without your help. If we can give them all a round of applause again. Lastly, I think we said it's an NSF-sponsored workshop, and I think I really wanted to thank the National Science Foundation because without that funding, we couldn't been able to even start the idea. Amy and Bob Chadek, I've had the conversation with them. Your support has been really, really very much appreciated. A round of applause for NSF. And we also had some other small, because we wanted to have a nice dinner yesterday, so we were able to get a little bit of some fun. So Microsoft, Globus, Mozilla, and the University of Chicago all came up to help to chip in to be able to give us to feed us for yesterday. So a round of applause for our sponsors again. So as I'm trying to wrap up, I think we're going to digest a lot of the feedback on the next steps. We were thinking of following up, some of this will be probably by communication. We are intending to put everything that we collected on our website, so the RDMI website will contain all the material, the presentations, And then actually on the website, there's also a contact email, rdmi@rcc.uchicago.edu. Feel free, if let's say on your way back or when you're asleep or during your happy hours, an idea come up, just continue to send them all, and we'll try to include those in our final report. But other than that, I just also wanted to encourage everybody to continue to think about ways in your meetings or conferences you go to continue these conversations. We are intending to work through CASC and the CASC leadership. We've already mentioned that at the next meeting, we can discuss how within that community we can also continue to have some sort of discussion. There were also conversation about above. I don't know if it's not too late to request one, but it could have been also another forum where many of us, we tend to congregate. But all those great ideas, and I think we can always put our heads together and find volunteers to make this happen. Other than that, I really would like to thank you all and wish you good, safe travels back, and I hope to continue hearing from you. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to remind anyone who didn't hear me announce this before, we have started a participant list. It's in the Google folder that's linked from all the questions. If you would like to share your contact information with other people that have been here, please add your name and info there. Thank you.